Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Cube Tuesdays. Now, it's the start of March, there's just been a new set that's come out, it's time to make some updates to my cube. What I thought I'd do today is just go through the recent changes that I've made and kind of just have a little chat about why I've made them and some of the new cards that I'm testing out. This is actually quite a small update for me, it's only about 9 cards. It's mainly just testing new stuff from Phyrexia Orb 1 and kind of fine-tuning some archetypes that are already in there. There's no archetype changes in this update, but yeah, we'll just go through some of the cards that we're adding and kind of give you a bit of the reasons behind that. So I think it's probably easier to start with the new cards. So firstly, Suspicious Stowaway is coming out. Mercurial Spelldancer is going in. Kind of spoke about this a little bit in the set review me and James did a couple of weeks ago. I think they fill a similar enough role. The unblockable creature part, get some damage through, is nice. Losing the looting effect on Suspicious Stowaway does suck a little bit. I do think there's a lot of decks in my cube that want to be putting things into the graveyard consistently. Suspicious Stowaway just helps with that while also getting some damage through. And then if it does flip, just having a 2/1 unblockable that draws you a card every turn is very nice. This is mainly coming out because I really hate Daybound, Nightbound. It's just a bit of a faff, and I think this is actually with this, there's only like 1 or 2 cards left in my cube. I'm trying to remove as many of them as I can just because it actually the mechanic just annoys me basically. Keeping track of it once it's introduced in the game, even if these creatures are gone, you still technically need to keep track of it because it could be brought back from the graveyard, that kind of thing. Just removing it for me is something I've been wanting to do for a bit of a while, and I think Mercurial Spelldancer is a card that can do it. I think it's just a really cool little card. The 2/1 unblockable body is just going to be really solid. It's going to, like, a lot of decks are going to like that. And the ability this has to copy some spells, I think could be quite cool and could be quite strong. My cube is currently the most powered it's ever been. There's a lot of powerful spells in there. There's a lot of extra turn cards in there now. I think this could be very strong in that kind of build. And I'm also kind of hoping that this will actually make red, blue, kind of like tempo burn become more of a thing. Because it's like copying up a lightning bolt and bolting your opponent twice for the win. Once this has got through for a load of damage because it is unblockable, maybe you put a bit of equipment on it. I think this could be quite good. And for me, Mercurial Spelldancer was an easy one to cut or to add over Suspicious Stowaway. In terms of other new ones, we are cutting Sphinx of the Steelwind to add Atraxa Grand Unifier. They kind of both do a similar kind of role. They're both big, dumb, multicolored idiots that you're trying to cheat into play. Atraxa Grand Unifier is definitely the new hotness. I managed to pick one up before it got super expensive because I think that card is actually getting played in like every format. I was hearing it was going to get played in like Vintage and that kind of stuff. So if it's getting played in every format, it means it probably should be tested in Cube. In terms of bodies, they're both pretty good, Sphinx of the Steelwind and Atraxa. Atraxa is definitely better. It is a bigger body. It has more abilities, that kind of thing. The protection from red and green never really comes up too much. That's more for kind of like getting through like a big reach creature, that kind of thing. And it means it doesn't die to like a couple of burn spells, that kind of thing. But the main reason that this is getting added is just I think Atraxa does more. The card draw from this I think is going to be really solid. In the set review, we didn't really talk about one thing that is a reason why it's getting played in a lot of older formats, is that you can pitch this to like the evoke creatures, which could be quite nice. I have all the evoke creatures apart from Endurance in my cube, so the fact this could pitch to 3 of them is quite nice. But mainly this is in because it's a bigger, dumber idiot that will win you games quicker than Sphinx of the Steelwind in the kind of big cheat into play decks. The fact that I'm cutting an artifact from this, meaning that I can't tinker this into play or Goblin Welder into play, is something that is a downside. I do like those decks having more of those effects, but I think Atraxa is just so good that to me, cutting a multicolored cheat target for another multicolored cheat target made the most sense. The next new card coming in, we have Armored Scrapgorger coming in for Paradise Druid. These basically do a very similar thing, I think. Paradise Druid was in my cube over the O2 with Hexproof, primarily because this one could actually attack. I like this having 2 power. It means the decks can actually kind of be a bit more proactive and that kind of stuff. And this still has the main bit of protection that you want. It's not going to get burn spelled on the turn it comes out, basically. You're still going to be able to play a 4-drop on turn 3 with this card. But the reason for adding Armored Scrapgorger into the cube is that it does a similar thing. It has the base level of it is a 2-mana dork that taps for any color. That is the base level for a lot of these cards. The fact that this can also exile cards from graveyards is the reason why it's going in. There's a lot of graveyard-based cards in my cube, and I said a lot of the times I don't like adding specific sideboard cards. The fact that this is a good creature that'll go in a lot of decks and is incidentally able to nerf cards from graveyards, that kind of thing, I think is going to be really good. And the fact that it can become a 3/3 and also just attack, I do like better. That is a better attacker than the Paradise Druid as well. Recently, I've added like the wheel package to my cube and like Bomberman combo. So there's a lot more stuff in the graveyard that currently there are not many answers for. I currently have like Scavenging Ooze, Lion Sash, and maybe like one or two others. But I think just adding some other ones that aren't generic, just like sideboard card hate, is something that I like. So for me, Armored Scrap Gorger was an easy one to come in and try out over Paradise Druid at this point. Next up, we have Conduit of Worlds coming in over Perennial Behemoth. So these basically do the same thing. They both let you play lands from your graveyard. On the set review, me and James were talking about which one to cut. I think he was right. I think it is Perennial Behemoth, and also there were some comments on that video kind of agreeing with that as well, that Perennial Behemoth, I think, is the cut. Yes, it is a colorless card, but you're mainly going to be playing it in green decks anyway, just so you get that value from that Unearth. And at that role, Conduit of Worlds is better because of that tap ability, that if you're just out of gas, or if there's just something really big, dumb, and stupid in your graveyard that you have the mana to replay, that's just really nice. There's so much added utility that this card brings over the Perennial Behemoth, over just the generic Crucible of Worlds, that although Perennial Behemoth has only been in for like 3 or 4 drafts, I think testing Conduit of Worlds is probably the correct shout at this point. And then last of the new cards for now, we are adding Nissa Ascended Animist, coming in over Nissa Vital Force. This is quite an easy one for me. I do like Nissa Vital Force. I have died to this card a lot. You're mainly just getting beaten down by the +1, and then the bottom abilities are kind of a bit more utility. Like the regrowth effect is quite nice. So for me, that's the main thing I'm going to miss from Nissa Vital Force. The beating down by 5/5s, I'm personally not going to miss, but I think other people in my cube might. But Nissa Ascended Animist, as we kind of went over in our set review, this is just a house of a card. Like, I'm hoping that this can make mono green good again in 2023. The fact that it's if you play this for, I'll be honest, it took me several takes to read this card in the set review. So if you play this for 7, you just overrun the board when it comes in. That is extremely strong and extremely good. But the fact that you still have the ability to pay it on 5 and leave yourself with a 4/4 token that the next turn you can make a 5/5 token means that I think this card is good enough on every level of the curve where you can play it, and it fills the role that mono green is needing in terms of like sometimes you need to play a 5-drop to stop yourself from dying to like an aggro deck, that kind of thing. But it's also your big dumb win condition when it comes to that as well. So I think it's going to be a really strong card, and I'm really glad you get to try this one out. Okay, so that's it for new cards. Let's go over some of the other changes and additions that I'm adding. Some of these might need a bit of explaining. So coming out is Sarprazan Skerry. These are kind of weird cards. I currently was running the full cycle of these. Basically, they are lands that come into play tapped with 2 depletion counters on them. Then the next turn they untap, and you can tap them to basically generate 2 mana, and you can do that twice. After the second time, when they have no depletion counters on them, they go to the graveyard. For me, the other colours have been quite good. I'm cutting 2 in this update, the other one we'll get to in a moment. But I've actually been quite impressed by the green, the red, and the white one. I'm trying to do like a chunky Boros thing in my cube right now, where basically it's running like the initiative creatures, the Comet Stellar Pup, that kind of thing. It's basically a deck that's trying to play 3 and 4 drops ahead of curve. And the red and white ones of these especially have been really, really solid. Basically, I'm trying to run as many Ancient Tombs as possible, and there aren't that many of them, and these are the closest that we have. But in blue, I've definitely noticed that this isn't an effect that that colour needs. So we're going to try out Aether Spellbomb. I think this is probably one of the best spell bombs, if not the best. I currently have the red one in right now, the one that you can sacrifice it and it'll deal 2 damage to something for a red, and I think it has the 1 sacrifice it, draw a card, that kind of thing. As I mentioned earlier, I currently have the Bomberman combo in my cube, which is like Aureox Salvagers, Lion's Eye Diamond. Together, those make infinite mana, but to then win the game, you need to have cheap artifacts, like specifically an artifact that costs 1 or less in your graveyard that you can bring back to win the game. The red one is in because that lets you like bolt your opponent out, or shock your opponent because it deals 2 damage. That's how you can win with that. With this lets you draw your whole deck. At that point, you can then find a way to win. Like Thassa's Oracle is in the cube, 4-mana Jace that does a similar thing is in the cube. So this could be a little cute, I will be honest, but in general, it's just a good card. Like the ability to bounce something to your opponent's hand is just a perfectly fine tempo card. And then it has the added upside of kind of going infinite with some other things I think could be quite good. And also in general, for the artifact deck as well, just having a critical density of like 1-mana artifacts or like cheap artifacts that kind of cycle themselves is really, really good. Like you can tinker off of this. That is good into your big thing. Just in general, having more of these in the cube, I have quite like. Like I find myself drafting these quite a lot, even if I'm not in the artifact deck. So having another one, I think could be quite cool. On the topic of cutting, we're cutting the black one as well, the black depletion land, and we're going to add Lake of the Dead. Now, this one might be a little greedy. So Lake of the Dead is a very all-in card. When it comes into play, you have to sacrifice Lake of the Dead unless you sacrifice a swamp, and then it taps for black, or it taps for 4 black if you sacrifice another swamp. This is just a card that I think is cool and I want to test out. If I'm honest, I'm not sure how strong this is going to be now. I think it's definitely stronger than Peat Bog, which is the main reason why it's coming in. But I think this is a card that will get better in my cube over the coming months. I'm kind of planning at some point in the next couple of months to try double fetches in my cube. So break Singleton, have double of every fetch, so I can add like a green-black lands deck with like the old Titania that makes 5/3s whenever you sacrifice a land. That with Lake of the Dead, I think could be quite cool as an archetype. So kind of at the moment, Lake of the Dead probably won't do too much. I'm kind of hoping that it like at a base level, it will help like Reanimator decks hardcast some of their big things. That could be quite strong. But it's a card I think that will get better over time. Then next up, we have a card that I should have added to my cube a while ago. I just only got one is kind of the reason. Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear is coming in. One of the best bits of equipment out there. Shadow Sphere is coming in over Everflowing Chalice. Everflowing Chalice is a fine mana rock, if I'm honest. But basically, the fact that you can't get this off of Urza Saga or a few other things means that it's just not been as good. Like, there's better things for the artifact deck to do in terms of, like there's other bigger mana rocks out there that they can ramp into. And there's better, cheaper ones as well if you need that critical density. That's why we've added the Aether Spellwoman as well. So for me, this is basically when I was looking to add Shadow Spear, what is the worst artifact that costs 0 or 1? It was Everflowing Chalice. Shadow Spear is coming in. In terms of Shadow Spear, I think it's just a super, super strong artifact. I think it's just a super, super strong bit of equipment. The +1/+1, the trample, the lifelink is really, really good. On a package that it only costs 1 to cast and 2 to equip, those are nice and cheap. Those are good. It helps you push over the edge in terms of damage, that kind of thing. And the lifelink will make races for your opponent way harder. And the ability to permanent your opponent's control, lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn will be flavor as text 90% of the time until the time when it's not, and then you'll probably win the game because you're able to answer their big dumb hexproof or indestructible creature. That could be very, very strong, and I do think will come up more than I initially think. And then lastly, now this is one that will take a bit of explaining, and I'm not sure if this is correct. I think this is more potentially shaky than adding Lake of the Dead. We are cutting Big Inferno Titan. Everyone knows what Inferno Titan does. It is a big lad that deals 3 damage when it comes in and when it attacks. We're cutting it for Ruin Grinder. So if anyone hasn't played with Ruin Grinder before, it is a cool card. It fills a similar role to Inferno Titan in that it is a big creature that does hit for damage. So Ruin Grinder is 5 and a red for a 7/4 artifact creature construct with menace. When it dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards, and it has Mountain Cycling for 2. So Ruin Grinder is a card I have had in my cube before, and I thought it actually did pretty well in there. So the fact it has Mountain Cycling means it can put itself into the graveyard naturally by itself, which means that in kind of a Reanimator deck, it's a big creature that can put itself into the graveyard for 2 mana by itself. You don't need a discard spell. That also works in the Goblin Welder decks, because again, this can put itself into the graveyard nice and quickly, nice and early, while also like just getting you that land that is bonus, and then you can cheat it into play, as we said, with the Goblin Welder or with some reanimation spells. So I did actually like Ruin Grinder when it was in the cube, but they print better 6-drops all the time. And as a 6-drop, Inferno Titan is better. On raw power level, I think Inferno Titan is so superior to Ruin Grinder. The reason why Ruin Grinder is coming back in and I'm giving it another shot is, as I think I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm running the wheels package in my cube now. There will be a video coming out on the channel in a couple of weeks. Do like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff if you want to see that video. It's me kind of breaking down the archetype. I'll give you the TLDR now. It's running things like, it's effects that make both players discard their hand to draw 7 new cards, while you run other effects that kind of stop your opponents from drawing cards. So things like Hull Breacher, Notion Thief, things like that. So basically the end result is you have a full grip of 7, your opponent has nothing, and then you just win by having just more resources them over the next bit of the game. The fact for me that Ruin Grinder is a big, dumb, idiot artifact creature that can swing through for a load of damage and a load of other decks will want it, and it has some play in the wheel deck, means that I want to try it out again and give it another test. Now, importantly, Ruin Grinder is a May ability when it dies. It doesn't force the opponent to draw 7 cards, they can choose not to. But if you have something like a Hull Breacher or a Notion Thief out, and they kill your Ruin Grinder, they can't draw the 7 cards. They can't choose to do the discarding draw 7 cards things because they won't get anything from it anyway. So in that deck, this becomes a 6-mana 7/4 menace that when it dies, only you draw 7 cards. That sounds really, really strong to me, and I think is a reason why I have to give it another test. Now that the wheels and the Notion Thieves and the Shield Druids, all this kind of cool stuff has come in. Cool, so yes, as I said, that is the updates. If you want to have a look at the rest of my cube, I will put a link to it down in the description below. Generally, I'll write updates for the cube whenever I make a change. I thought I'd make a video for this one. I will write some stuff in here to kind of summarize what we've gone over today. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Do let me know down in the comments what you think of these changes. Are any of them a bit suspect? Have you had any experience with some of the new cards that I'm adding? Do you think there's any cards I probably should have cut instead? Oh, and especially if there's any other cards from the new set you think I should be testing. I will try Squirrel at some point. I just need to work out what 1 or 2 or 3 white drop I'm going to cut to replace it. But anyway, until next time, please like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.